Hi, I'm Delara. For most of my life, my family treated me like a ghost at their own dinner table. No matter what I achieved, it was never enough to earn a seat that mattered. At my sister's engagement party, I was seated next to the restroom again. But then, her fiancé, Alaric, pulled out his phone, Googled my name, and everything unraveled. The backyard looked like it had been lifted straight out of a magazine. Every tablecloth was perfectly pressed. Candles flickered in little glass jars, and the flowers, white roses and baby's breath, were arranged like they had an audience to impress. I stepped onto the patio, heels hitting the concrete softly, eyes sweeping over the scene. This was Vera's big night after all, her engagement party to Alaric. Of course, it was perfect. She'd never accept anything less. A server smiled and gestured toward the seating chart. I found my name written neatly in gold ink. Table 9. I followed the winding path to the edge of the festivities, where the laughter grew fainter and the restroom door loomed. Table 9 was a folding table, its plastic cloth askew, its centerpiece a sad little vase with a few drooping stems. It was the table that told me exactly where I stood, almost invisible, almost forgotten. But not for long. Alaric. Of course, it was perfect. She'd never accept anything less. A server smiled and gestured toward the seating chart. I found my name written neatly in gold ink. Table 9. I followed the winding path around the central tables, past the ones with place cards for Mom and Dad, the Clarks, Vera's bridesmaids, and there, tucked right by the bathroom near a serving station, was mine. Lenora, my mother, had looked up briefly when I arrived, waving distractedly before refocusing her attention on Vera. She was holding court with her friends, their laughter high-pitched and precise like everything else she curated. I sat down and adjusted my dress, pretending the smell of antiseptic wafting from the restroom wasn't bothering me. Someone passed behind me and said, "Oh, this must be overflow seating." I pretended not to hear it. Across the yard, Vera was glowing in that way she always did when everyone was watching her. The center of attention. The perfect daughter. Her hair curled just enough to look effortless. Her dress pressed just enough to look casual. Every movement she made seemed choreographed for admiration. And she was good at it. Too good. What nobody knew, what I had never bothered to announce because nobody ever asked, was that I had designed that party, not the conceptual Pinterest board kind of design, the real kind, the deposit I had wired anonymously to cover the venue, the florist I had personally called, the string lights that now flickered like fireflies across the canopy, each one chosen by me at 2 a.m. when everyone else was asleep. But none of that would matter tonight. It never did. Center of attention, the perfect daughter. Her hair curled just enough to look effortless. Her dress pressed just enough to look casual. Every movement she made seemed choreographed for admiration, and she was good at it. I had to give her that. A woman in a lavender blouse sat next to me, smiling politely. "You must be Vera's sister." "I am," I said, offering a smile. "Oh, so what do you do?" Her tone was friendly, curious. Before I could speak, Vera's voice cut in from across the patio, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "She handles emails and stuff," she called out, a glint in her eye. "Admin things. She's always been great at organizing folders." Laughter rippled through the nearby tables, light, dismissive, the kind that asks nothing and assumes nothing. I clenched my teeth behind a smile, nodding. The woman looked at me with a little too much sympathy. "That's important work, too," she offered. "I wanted to say I run a firm with assets that could buy this entire neighborhood. I wanted to say I've sat across from CEOs who hang on my every word about market strategy. I wanted to say that the pitch deck Vera used to land her first job, the one she claims was her own, was mine. every slide, every late night. But I didn't, because the truth wasn't welcome here. Only Vera's version of it. When the wine was poured, I sipped slowly. I'd learned a long time ago that pushing back in moments like this didn't earn respect. It earned exile. So I stayed quiet. I always had. That was the role carved out for me early. The quieter one. The reasonable one. The one who doesn't make things uncomfortable. In moments like this didn't earn respect. It earned exile. So I stayed quiet. I always had. That was the role carved out for me early. The quieter one. The reasonable one. The one who didn't make things uncomfortable. I watched Alaric from afar, standing near the fireplace with Vera's father and some of his colleagues. He wasn't laughing. He was scanning the crowd slowly, eyes lingering just a beat longer on me. He didn't say anything, but I saw it. That slight squint, that tiny crease between his brows. He noticed. At least someone did. Such a sweet gesture to come all the way here, an aunt whispered, leaning over as she passed me on her way back from the buffet. Especially when it's not really your circle. I nodded and kept smiling. Later, when I offered to help clear some dishes, Vera waved me off like I was embarrassing her. "No need," she said, glancing toward the guests. "You're not staff." So I sat back down at table 9 alone again. And that's when it happened. Something shifted, not in the air, not in the people, but inside me. I felt it like a thread pulling taut across my chest. The way Alaric looked at me, the way Vera snapped back into performance mode as soon as eyes were on her. There was something in his gaze that felt different. Not pity, not curiosity for its own sake, something closer to recognition. Then Alaric straightened, tucked his phone from his pocket, and began walking toward me. A thread pulling taut across my chest. The way Alaric looked at me. The way Vera snapped back into performance mode as soon as eyes were on her. The way no one, not one person, questioned why I was seated near a toilet while Vera's college roommate got a seat beside the bride's mother. It wasn't new, but it wasn't invisible anymore. I picked up my glass and stared across the table, letting the hum of the party dull around me. Something in me wasn't willing to swallow it this time. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen next, but I knew it was coming. The microphone let out a soft buzz as Vera stepped up to the podium, and the crowd leaned in with wine glasses raised and anticipation painted across their faces. I stayed seated at table 9, my fingertips brushing the linen as I watched her. Lenora dabbed the corner of her eye with a handkerchief she'd probably spritzed with her favorite rosewater. Alaric smiled, standing off to the side, hands folded politely, pride stitched into every line of his jaw. I didn't expect to be acknowledged. Not really, but a small part of me, naive, stubborn, still listened closely. "Tonight wouldn't have been possible without the incredible support of our families," Vera began, her voice syrupy sweet. "My amazing parents, Lenora and James, for always believing in me. My bridesmaids for their endless patience. And of course, my wonderful Alaric, for making every day feel like a fairy tale." She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd. I waited. She turned toward the side, smiled at the planner, and said nothing else. Not a mention of the person who actually paid for the lights, the flowers, the venue. Not a word about the design work, the late nights, the borrowed money that became a gift. I was invisible again. But this time, I felt it differently. This time, it burned. Every line of his jaw. I didn't expect to be acknowledged. Not really, but a small part of me, naive, stubborn, still listened closely. "Tonight wouldn't have been possible without the incredible support of our parents," Vera began, her voice ringing like she'd rehearsed every vowel. "Lenora and Calvin, your generosity made this entire evening come to life. The applause came fast. Cameras flashed. Someone whistled. I blinked. It was subtle, clean, a well-practiced omission. Not a word about the invoice I paid. The floral arrangement budget I approved. The rental deposit that hit my bank account before hers. Nothing about the quiet call 2 months ago when she whispered, "I just need a little help. But let's keep it between us. Mom's already doing so much." I watched her deliver her thanks like a woman who truly believed she'd done it all alone, or worse, believed no one would dare challenge her version of the truth. Alaric looked at me briefly, his smile faltering. There was a pause in his brow, barely perceptible, but I saw it. I tuned out the rest of the speech. The night air turned heavier, like it absorbed the weight of my silence. Around me, the guests laughed at Vera's jokes and clinked glasses when she toasted her future. I sat still, feet crossed at the ankles, hands folded on the table. Waiting. I didn't know for what. Then Alaric walked toward table 9. The air turned heavier, like it absorbed the weight of my silence. Around me, the guests laughed at Vera's jokes and clinked glasses when she toasted her future. I sat still, feet crossed at the ankles, hands folded neatly in my lap, remembering. I remembered the time she hosted a baby shower and asked me to create the invitations, design the logo, and then told everyone it was done by her assistant. I remembered when I helped her land her first consulting client by reworking her pitch deck, and she introduced me at brunch as my little sister who loves spreadsheets. But this was different. This was a stage, a microphone, an audience, and a choice. She could have said one sentence, even a vague, "And to those who helped in quiet ways, thank you." But she didn't. Not because she forgot. Because it wasn't convenient. Applause brought me back. I clapped lightly, mechanical. Vera bowed her head as if she were receiving an award, then stepped down, weaving back toward her circle of admirers. Alaric walked toward her slowly, the crease in his brow still there. Lenora leaned over to whisper something to a woman in navy lace, her eyes darting, nervous. The night shifted again, from warmth to something stiffer. I stood, smoothing my dress. People were milling about, moving between tables. Then Alaric turned. He was walking toward table 9. Toward me, to whisper something to a woman in navy lace, her eyes darting, nervous. The night shifted again, from warmth to something stiffer. I stood, smoothing my dress. People were milling about, moving between tables. "She always delivers the best speeches," someone said. "I didn't know she organized everything herself," another murmured. A guest near the bar caught my eye and said with a grin, "Nice of you to come. It must be hard with your schedule, right?" I gave a polite nod, stored the comment away. Then I caught Alaric watching me again, not staring, just registering. As I cleared my plate, he stepped beside me and spoke low enough that only I could hear. "You do work in investments, right?" The question felt casual, but the timing wasn't. "I do," I said simply. He nodded once. "Finance?" "Yes, venture capital." He paused, that tiny crease again. He said, pulling his phone out slowly. "What's the name of your firm?" I told him. His thumbs moved quickly. The glow of the screen lit up his face. He didn't say a word, just stared at his screen like he'd just uncovered a lie. Then Alaric didn't speak. He just held out his phone, his eyes flicking from the screen to me, then back again. I knew what he was looking at before I saw it. The headline sat right above my photo, "Under 40 female founders to watch." I didn't flinch. "Yeah," I said quietly. "That's me." His brows furrowed. "Why?" he asked. "Why didn't anyone mention this?" Before I could answer, I saw Vera walking toward us. Her pace was too measured, her smile stretched too wide. She caught a glimpse of the screen and halted mid-step. Her face didn't fall, it shifted. Not panic, but recalibration. A performer missing a cue and improvising. She laughed a little too loudly. "Oh, that's old. Just a silly list." She waved it off like a napkin caught in the wind, but Alaric wasn't smiling. Before the silence could spread, Lenora clapped her hands. "Everyone, let's refresh our glasses. Dessert is almost ready." People moved like they'd been prompted, grateful for a cue to break eye contact. I remained still. Then something inside me cracked. Not violently, not with noise, but with clarity. I was 8 when I won the blue ribbon for a painting of a girl riding her bike through a storm. I'd worked on it for days, hiding in the basement with my crayons and watercolors. When I showed my mother, she glanced at it and said, "That's lovely, dear. Now help me set the table." She never framed it, never told anyone. Tonight was no different. My achievements were never the story they wanted to tell. But now, Alaric knew, and he wasn't going to forget. I was 8 when I won the blue ribbon for a painting of a girl riding her bike through a storm. I'd worked on it for days, hiding in the basement with my crayons and half-empty watercolor tubes. My art teacher told me it was emotionally advanced. I didn't know what that meant then. I just knew it made me feel proud. I brought it home, bursting. Mom was in the kitchen talking about Vera's cheer uniform that had just arrived. Dad was at the dining table with a newspaper. "I won!" I'd shouted, holding up the painting. Mom glanced. "That's lovely, sweetheart." Then, "Did you hang your uniform yet, Vera? You have practice on Thursday, remember?" I left the painting on the counter. I found it 3 weeks later, folded in half, wedged between old grocery ads and the toaster. The ribbon was crumpled. That was the first time I realized forgetting can be a choice. Back at the party, Vera was surrounded by people again, laughing, gesturing, posing for selfies. But it wasn't the same. Something had shifted. Not just in the room, but in me. They didn't forget me accidentally. They didn't overlook me out of distraction. They erased me because it made their roles easier to maintain, their version of family, their version of success, their version of Vera. My smile wasn't going to return to what it was before. They didn't forget me accidentally. They didn't overlook me out of distraction. They erased me because it made their roles easier to maintain, their version of family, of success, of Vera. My smile wasn't hollow now. It was precise. As I turned back to the table, I passed 2 guests whispering over a phone. "She's always been sort of outside, right?" Quiet background type. They didn't know I heard. I didn't correct them. I just walked past and smiled. Not bitter, measured. I wasn't angry at the narrative. I was just done letting it stand. From across the yard, Vera looked at me again. Her glass was raised, but untouched. Her jaw was tight. She held her expression in place, like it was part of her outfit. Lenora leaned in toward a cousin, talking fast, darting her eyes toward me like I might erupt. Alaric hadn't moved. He was still holding the phone, his thumb frozen mid-scroll. The music played on. People danced, but I stood in the middle of it all like someone who just remembered they had a voice. They spent their lives looking through me. Tonight they were going to see me. The air between us felt charged, every glance from Vera a calculation, every whisper from Lenora a damage control strategy. I could feel the shift like a change in pressure before a storm. The blue ribbon memory surfaced again, but this time it didn't sting. It steeled me. I was no longer the girl who left her masterpiece crumpled between junk mail. I was the woman who had built an empire while they weren't watching. I reached the drink station, my fingers wrapping around a glass of water. The condensation cooled my palm. I took a sip and let the ice settle. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be the one to break first. They were going to see me. The music had softened into a low murmur, blending with the hum of distant conversation. and the occasional clink of glass. I was at the drink station, my fingers curled around a fresh tumbler of sparkling water, when Aunt Carol appeared beside me, her perfume strong enough to chase the bubbles right out of the glass. She leaned in, eyes smiling, but voice sharpened by something else entirely. "Let's not ruin your sister's big night, dear. It's not the place." It sounded gentle, almost kind, but it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command in a velvet glove. I nodded slowly, turning my attention back to the glass, as if that would cool the sting. Behind me, the party went on. Clusters of guests laughing too loudly. Pockets of people exchanging polite nothings. From across the garden, I felt Vera's gaze pierce through the soft lights like a laser. She wasn't smiling this time, not the way she had earlier. I caught Lenora pulling her aside near the hydrangeas, lips tight, whispering in that way mothers do when they think they're the only ones holding the structure together. Her eyes flicked toward me just once, quick, clipped, like I was a crack in the floor. She was hoping no one would step on it. Alaric stood not far, arms folded, phone dark now in his hand. He was watching. Not the crowd, not Vera, me. I had smiled and nodded. Because what else do you do when the people meant to protect you are also the ones telling you to disappear? Tonight, I could taste that same syrupy tone in every word being whispered around me. Vera approached not long after, drink in hand, her smile barely holding form. "Hey," she said, "just checking. Everything okay?" These parties can feel like a lot sometimes, especially for people who aren't used to them. I looked at her and said nothing. She shifted her weight, laughed softer this time. "You know how Mom gets when things feel out of her control." Still, I didn't speak. The silence between us grew thick enough to feel. She glanced over her shoulder toward Alaric, then back at me, her eyes narrowing just a fraction before she reassembled her mask. "Anyway," she said, her voice dipping lower, "I just don't want any awkwardness tonight. You understand?" I understood perfectly. She wasn't worried about awkwardness. She was worried about exposure. The Google search had already happened. The list was out. But here she was, still trying to frame my existence as the problem. "Vera," I said, finally letting my voice surface, calm and clear. "I've been balanced my entire life. Maybe it's time things got a little loud." Her face flickered a crack in the porcelain. Then she laughed, too bright, and walked away. "I've been balanced my entire life, Vera," I said calmly, quietly, conveniently. "Maybe it's time things got a little loud." She blinked just once. Her smile froze in place, waiting for a new cue that wasn't coming. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words died somewhere in her throat. Alaric was watching now, and he wasn't smiling either. I didn't wait for her comeback. I turned and walked away, steady steps through the crowd that suddenly didn't seem so interested in her anymore. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. But every move I made tonight had become louder than any argument. Something in my chest told me this tension wasn't over. It was only starting to simmer. I went inside for something as simple as a clutch I'd left near the kitchen, something ordinary. But when I walked past the study, a folded piece of paper on the desk caught my eye. It was half hidden under a stack of floral coasters, but the header was unmistakable, the event planner's logo. I picked it up, my fingers cold against the weight of the paper. The words were short, direct, typed in a clean font. "Per the bride's request, please ensure no microphones or toasting opportunities are accessible to Delara during the reception. She prefers not to be called on. Thanks for your discretion." There it was, a paper trail of my erasure, starting to simmer. The email was never meant to be printed, but that night, it was. I'd gone inside for something as simple as a clutch I'd left near the kitchen. Something ordinary, But the moment I stepped into that back hallway, past the chatter and the soft music and the smell of warming pastries, I noticed the hum of the portable printer still running. There was a single sheet of paper lying in the tray. I almost didn't look. I almost walked away. But curiosity is a habit built from years of exclusion. I picked it up, half expecting to see a vendor's invoice or a last-minute table update. Instead, the second line caught my eye. "Please keep my sister away from the mic," it read. "She has a tendency to make things about herself, and honestly, her wardrobe choices are always distracting." The email was from Vera, sent to her event planner, forwarded to the catering team, and now accidentally printed like a confession dropped in the wrong pew. I read it again. My name, her words. I folded it once, neatly, and slipped it into my bag. When I found her near the garden path, Vera was adjusting her neckline and preparing to rejoin the crowd. She didn't see me until I was standing right there, close enough to watch her rehearsed smile falter. The silence between us was heavy now, but I didn't speak. I just looked at her, and I watched her realize that I knew exactly what she had done. I held out the sheet with a calm hand. "This, accidentally printed." She froze. Her eyes dropped to the paper. She read it in a blink, and then again slower. Her fingers curled slightly, tightening around her champagne flute. That draft wasn't meant to be seen," she said quickly. "It's not what I meant." I cut her off, my voice flat and direct. "No, I think it's exactly what you meant." She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "You're overreacting." It was a phrase I'd heard before, practically Vera's favorite reflex. Overreacting. That's what they called it when I refused to stay invisible? Footsteps approached. Lenora's voice followed. "Is something going on?" She looked at both of us, her eyes landing on the paper now in Vera's hand. She plucked it gently, read the lines, and her lips tightened. "This is clearly a misunderstanding," she said after a pause. "Everyone's under pressure. You know how these things get." "No," I said, holding my ground. "This isn't stress. This is a pattern, and it's not going to keep happening." Vera tried to interject, her tone already building to protest. I raised my hand, not to strike, but to silence. "I've spent years being quiet, being convenient. Not anymore." Lenora's face hardened, but before she could speak, I turned and walked back toward the garden, the paper trail of their erasure tucked safely in my bag. "No," I said, holding my ground. "This isn't stress, this is a pattern, and it's not going to keep happening." Vera tried to interject, her tone already building to protest. I raised my hand slightly. She stopped, for once. "I won't be the punchline in a room I helped pay for," I said clearly. Vera scoffed, her voice clipped. "You're always so dramatic." "No," I replied. "I'm just exact. And you're not used to anyone seeing you clearly." The hallway had gone quiet. Lenora's expression flickered between control and fear. I folded the paper again and handed it to Vera. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it. Without another word, I turned and stepped back into the party. A few heads turned. A cousin tilted her head, reading something unspoken on my face. Alaric looked up from his drink, brows knitting together. I didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't have to. The story was starting to tell itself. If Vera wanted a war of perception, she just lost the first battle. By the time I stepped back into the garden, everything looked just as it had before. Tables lit with string lights, glasses filled, laughter circulating like perfume on the breeze. But something was different. I felt it in the way people glanced my way and quickly looked down. They had heard something. Or they were about to. The night wasn't over, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one keeping quiet. It had before. Tables lit with string lights, glasses filled, laughter circulating like perfume on the breeze. But something was different. I felt it in the way people glanced my way and quickly looked down. In the way Vera's voice climbed just a little too high, like she was trying to reclaim a stage that had quietly shifted. I didn't need a spotlight. I never did. Alaric approached me near the edge of the garden. He didn't offer a greeting or a drink. He just held out his phone. On the screen, a familiar headshot stared back at me. My professional portrait. Just above it, the headline read, "Meet the women changing venture capital before 40. "Your company? This is yours?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. He didn't say anything else, but the crease in his forehead deepened. He gave me the kind of nod that meant more than words, an acknowledgement, a reckoning. Nearby, a couple of guests clustered near the fire pit were huddled over their own screens. One nudged the other, whispering, "She's on Forbes. Did you know that?" "No," the other replied. "Why didn't they say anything?" The ripples had started. Vera noticed. I watched her laugh too loudly at a joke someone hadn't quite finished. Her smile wobbled at the edges. She touched her hair 3 times in rapid succession, a tell I recognized from childhood, the nervous recalibration before a pivot. The narrative was shifting, not because I had demanded it, but because someone finally bothered to look. Why didn't they say anything? The ripples had started. Vera noticed. I watched her laugh too loudly at a joke someone hadn't quite finished. Her smile wobbled at the edges. She touched her hair 3 times in the same minute, a tic she always had when she felt control slipping. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Someone asked, "Isn't that Vera's little sister?" A cousin leaned toward her. "Why didn't you ever mention your sister was in Forbes?" Vera's mouth twitched. "She doesn't like attention." I stepped forward, voice calm and steady. "I like truth." Our eyes locked. She looked away first. Alaric stood nearby, arms crossed. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked her, tone even. Vera shifted. It wasn't relevant. "It wasn't convenient," Alaric corrected. There was no anger in his voice, just precision. It was the kind of response that didn't need volume to sting. Guests nearby had fallen silent. They didn't need the full context. They knew enough. I scanned the faces around me, some confused, some intrigued, a few simply uncomfortable. Lenora stayed in the corner, lips pursed so tightly they looked white. But I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel vindication. What I felt was something quieter and heavier. I didn't need to speak again. The facts were speaking for me. The whispers were louder than any mic could have ever been. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel vindication. What I felt was something quieter and heavier. I didn't need to speak again. The facts were speaking for me. The whispers were louder than any mic could have been. People would Google. They would ask questions. They would find answers, and they'd learn the truth that had always been there. Vera had crafted a narrative with herself in the center. I was just supposed to orbit quietly, throwing money when needed, shrinking when asked. But now, the center was shifting. I walked away, calm, deliberate. This wasn't revenge. This was recognition. They ignored the woman behind the curtain. Now the curtain was gone. The air outside had shifted. What was once a celebration now crackled with something else. Uncertainty, or the collective instinct that a storm had already passed, but another was waiting to break. I moved through the crowd slowly, unhurried. Eyes followed me. Phones buzzed in hands. I could see the ripple of awareness pass from person to person like wind through wheat. My name, once whispered in dismissal, was now murmured with questions, curiosity. A few looked guilty. Most looked intrigued. Near the bar, a bridesmaid in a backless satin dress raised her voice just enough to be heard. "Some people just can't stand not being the center of attention, huh?" I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Let her narrative burn in the open air. I had already won the only war that mattered, the one against invisibility. Most looked intrigued. Near the bar, a bridesmaid in a backless satin dress raised her voice just enough to be heard. "Some people just can't stand not being the center of attention, huh?" There was laughter, short and sharp. I stopped, turned. "Some people confuse being seen with being self-centered," I replied, voice even. She didn't answer, but the group quieted. That was when Vera pushed through the guests like she'd been waiting backstage for her cue. "You hijacked my night," she snapped, face flushed. "Everything was fine until you made it about you." "No," I said simply. "Everything was fine until your version of the truth couldn't hold the weight of a Google search." She opened her mouth, rage rising fast, but Alaric stepped between us. "I think you should stop," he said to her, calm, cold. And then from the other side of the garden, a voice spoke, older, confident, surprised. "Wait a minute," the woman said, pointing gently with a cocktail napkin. "Aren't you the donor who funded our women's fund last spring? You asked to remain anonymous." All heads turned, including Vera's. I nodded once. "Yes." A silence fell, thick and abrupt. Vera's face drained of color. The applause that had once chased her every word was nowhere now. Instead, there was a quiet unraveling. People seeing past the surface, remembering what it felt like to stand in the presence of someone genuinely influential. A silence fell, thick and abrupt. Vera's face drained of color. The applause that had once chased her every word was nowhere now. Instead, there was a quiet unraveling. People seeing past the surface, remembering what they'd heard, what they'd believed, what they'd been told to ignore. "You wanted control," I said directly to her. "You wanted to curate a version of me that made you more comfortable, easier to stand next to. You didn't want to share the stage, so you edited me out." She said nothing. I turned to the crowd, meeting their eyes without fear. "I didn't come here to be celebrated, but I'm done being erased." Someone nodded. Another murmured something to a friend. One guest, Vera's old college roommate, looked downright ashamed. Vera stood rooted in place, her hands trembling at her sides. Even Lenora didn't step in this time. She stood by a table, clutching the back of a chair like she couldn't decide whether to sit down or collapse. The music had stopped. No one had noticed when. The air was still, charged with the weight of revelation. I looked out over the room, a strange calm taking root inside me. "This isn't my revenge," I said almost to myself. "It's just my reality, finally allowed in." No one dared speak. They wanted silence. What they got was proof. I stepped forward slowly, the hem of my dress brushing over the grass that had been watered with secrets. The path ahead was clear now. I was no longer invisible. Myself. It's just my reality, finally allowed in. No one dared speak. They wanted silence. What they got was proof. I stepped forward slowly, the hem of my dress brushing over the grass that had been trampled by hours of champagne-fueled congratulations. This time, no one clapped. No one toasted. No one dared stop me. Eyes followed me. Shoulders shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. I reached the head table, paused, and opened my clutch. Inside, 2 envelopes, one cream-colored, sealed with a wax stamp. The other, my original design, the one Vera replaced without explanation. I held the first envelope up, not like a weapon, but like a final receipt. "This," I said quietly but clearly, "is the contract that paid for tonight." I set it down in front of Vera and Lenora. The wax popped softly as I opened it. I let the papers unfold gently, as if giving them time to consider every word they had ignored. My name sat there, typed plainly, my signature at the bottom, the dollar amount circled, the date, 3 weeks before Vera even confirmed her venue. A wave of discomfort swept the table. No one said a word. Then I pulled out the second envelope. "This," I continued, "was the original invitation." I laid it next to the contract. The design was unmistakably mine. Simple, elegant, bold. Vera's eyes widened. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. No one said a word. Then I pulled out the second envelope. "This," I continued, "was the original invitation." I laid it next to the contract. The design was unmistakably mine. Simple, elegant, bold. Underneath Vera and Alaric's names, there it was. Hosted by Delara Thompson. "I was meant to be part of this," I said, voice steady. "You made me invisible again." I didn't need to raise my tone. The silence had already done the amplification for me. The contrast between the lies and the proof sat on the linen across the crystal like a courtroom exhibit. This wasn't anger. This was evidence. Someone near the back whispered, "She paid for it all?" Another guest tilted their phone to show a neighbor my Forbes feature. Screens glowed. Truth traveled. Alaric sat at the table now, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He looked up at me, not with shock. He'd already seen the truth. But with something else. Maybe regret, maybe apology. He nodded once. Vera's voice cracked. "You could have told him, Delara." I turned to her. "I did, with every quiet act. You just pretended not to see. You never listened." Lenora's lips moved, but no sound came. She blinked slowly, gaze shifting from the envelope to her wine glass. This time, she didn't defend her daughter. She didn't defend herself. She didn't. You just never listened. Lenora's lips moved, but no sound came. She blinked slowly, gaze shifting from the envelope to her wine glass. This time, she didn't defend her daughter. She didn't defend herself, and I didn't need her to. I stepped back, not in retreat, but in finality. Each stride toward the garden edge felt like shedding a skin I didn't realize I'd been wearing my whole life. One stitched by omission, hemmed in silence, lined with tolerance. I didn't need to stay. I didn't need them to apologize. For once, I hadn't shown up just to be seen. I stood still. I spoke. I laid it all bare. And now they would have to sit in what they'd buried me under. Freedom never felt so quiet and so deserved. The package arrived on a Thursday. No warning, no text. Just a cardboard box on my doorstep with my father's handwriting on the label. For a moment, I stared at it, unsure if I should open it right away or let it sit beside the door like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Inside, nestled between tissue paper and a copy of my first book, was a note written in careful all-caps letters. My father never did cursive. It read, "I read this twice. The first time to see what you'd written. The second to understand what I'd missed." And a copy of my first book was a note written in careful all-caps letters. My father never did cursive. It read, "I read this twice. The first time to see what you'd written. The second time to hear you." I sat on my couch, the book in my lap, the words blurring under the weight of everything unsaid for years. I flipped through the pages. He had underlined passages, dog-eared corners. He had, in his own way, paid attention. Later that night, I called him. He picked up on the second ring. "Hi, Dad." Hey, sweetheart. There was a pause. One of those long ones that sit between people who don't quite know where to begin, but know they have to start somewhere. I should have known, he said softly. I should have asked more, listened better. You didn't know because you were always looking in the direction they pointed you, I replied. I wasn't hiding, he said. I just got tired of yelling into silence. Do you want to try again? I asked. I mean, start from here. I think I do, I said. And I meant it. In the following days, he emailed asking if I'd be willing to sign a few more books. His coworkers had asked about me. Apparently, he'd started talking. It wasn't grand. It wasn't showy. But it was sincere, and it was a beginning. In the following days, my father's emails came, each one a tentative bridge. He asked for signed copies for his coworkers. It was small, but sincere. From Vera, there was nothing. No apology, no message. Just a tagged photo that popped up online a week later, her smiling in a boutique, holding a glass of wine like nothing had happened. She was still curating, but I was no longer her backdrop. I didn't feel spite. I didn't even feel angry. Just tired and oddly free. My writing had changed. When I sat back down at my desk, the words came more fluidly, not as defenses or declarations, but as quiet truths. My editor called with news. The next book's pre-orders were stronger than expected. There was a quiet satisfaction in that. Not vindication, stability. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. A few days later, I packaged a galley copy of the new book. No note, just my signature on the title page. The address, Lenora's house. I didn't expect a response. That wasn't the point. This wasn't an olive branch or a weapon. It was simply presence, offered, not demanded. For years, they had crafted the story they wanted. Now I was writing my own. I didn't add a note, just signed the title page and sealed it in a padded envelope. The address was familiar, Lenora's house. I didn't expect a response. That wasn't the point. This wasn't a bridge offering or an olive branch. This was a door left unlocked, not held open. A chance for her to see me, not through Vera's narrative, not through selective memories, but on the page where I'd always been honest. Whether she read it or not was hers to carry. As I placed the envelope into the outgoing mail bin and stepped outside, Seattle's air greeted me with that late autumn chill that always smells faintly of pine and possibility. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder who was talking about me, or what still lingered in that house I left behind. This time, I didn't need anyone to see me. I had already seen myself. Looking back, if there's one truth that held me steady, it's this. Silence may keep the peace, but it rarely brings healing. For too long, I chose silence to protect others' comfort. I let myself be edited out of moments I helped build, conversations I should have led, and a family I was always part of, even when they refused to see it. But standing still and speaking up doesn't always mean yelling. Sometimes, it's simply refusing to disappear. Of moments I helped build, conversations I should have led, and a family I was always part of, even when they refused to see it. But standing still and speaking up doesn't always mean yelling. Sometimes, it's laying down the facts. It's honoring your own story even when others have tried to rewrite it. It's choosing to live visible, not for recognition, but for integrity. If you've ever felt overlooked, muted, or forced into the shadows by those closest to you, know this. You are not alone, and you are not powerless. Truth has a quiet way of revealing itself, and when it does, it doesn't need volume. It needs courage. So, let me ask you, have you ever felt invisible in your own family? What did you do when your truth was dismissed? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Whether you're watching from Texas, Michigan, or anywhere else in the world, your voice matters here. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment And tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't connect with you, let me know why. Let's have that conversation. And if you want more stories where everything changes in a single moment, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because every story has a moment where everything shifts, and yours might be next.